Welcome birds and mammals to Madagascar Monday. I'm your host, M3K. And today we will be going over the complete timeline of the Madagascar franchise as well as explaining some of the plot holes found throughout.
Ladies and gentlemen,
The timeline begins with the 2020 Hulu show, A Little Wild. The show covers the early lives of the main cast of the Madagascar films. Next is the 2014 to 2017 Netflix show, All Hail King Julian. It starts with King Julian XIII becoming the king of
a medium-sized tribe of lemurs on the island of Madagascar!
and ends when Alex washes up on the beach of Madagascar in the original film. Next we have the 2005 DreamWorks short, A Christmas Caper, which takes place sometime before the first Madagascar film. Exactly how long before is unknown. Now we move on to the first of the Madagascar trilogy. This starts somewhere during or possibly slightly before the finale of All Hail King Julian. 2009 Merry Madagascar is another short film which takes place at some point after the first film, while the main cast is still on the island waiting for the plane to be renovated. The second film in the trilogy, 2008 Escape to Africa, starts with the penguins and the other random side characters taking off from the island in the plane which previously served as the royal palace of the Julian kings, and ends with the penguins and chimps leaving to go gamble all of their newly found riches away in Monte Carlo. The short, 2013's Madly Madagascar may take place somewhere during the second film while the penguins are working on the plane somehow. We'll talk more about that in the plot holes part of the video. The third film, 2012 Europe's Most Wanted, begins with Marty, Melman, Gloria, and Alex deciding to go to, well, Europe, and ends with them finally getting back to the Central Park Zoo only to decide to join the circus instead. 2014 Penguins of Madagascar picks up where the trilogy left off, this time following Skipper, Private, Rico, and Kowalski. It ends sometime before the 2008 to 2015 Nickelodeon show, The Penguins of Madagascar, begins. Now we move on to the plot holes. First, the main plot of A Little Wild involves the main cast from the movies going on adventures outside the zoo. However, in the original film Madagascar, the cast talks about how they can't go outside the zoo, implying that they've never been outside the zoo. This is literally the plot point that kicks the whole franchise off, and thus, A Little Wild is probably not canon. Next, there are some small differences between the next most recent addition to the franchise and the original movie, that being, All Hail King Julian. First is the cast of the show. There are many characters that are a significant part of the show that don't appear in the movie, some of which are explained, like Clover, Sage, King Julian XII, known in the show as Uncle King Julian, and Carl. However, there are many others that are not explained, such as Ted, Poncho, Horst, and more. Although I think we can just explain this by looking outside of the canon and just understand when these were written. The movie came out in 2005 and was the first in the series, and the show came out in 2014 and is the second most recent addition to the franchise. It is still a plot hole though, and that's what this video is about. One interesting thing is that one character on the show is, in the movie, that being Willie, though his voice and personality are quite different.
Yes, Willie. I like them.
The last plot hole here is how much King Julian talks about how he loves his kingdom in the show, only to leave them behind forever at the beginning of Escape to Africa to end up living in the Central Park Zoo. This fan art I feel expresses very well how it feels to watch this part of the franchise in timeline order. Madly Madagascar follows King Julian and the rest of the cast from Escape to Africa, as Julian finds a love potion and sells it to the residents of the reservation in exchange for their souls, while the main cast attempts to celebrate Valentine's Day, King Julian being the main antagonist as usual. However, there are so many plot holes here it may as well be an alternate universe. First, this would literally be taking place somewhere in the middle of the movie, because the penguins are in the process of constructing the plane, but there is really no room for it in the timeline of the film. The entirety of Escape to Africa is roughly continuous apart from the flashback at the beginning. And more to that point, Gloria and Melman are clearly already in love, and Melman is trying to build a parade float for her as a Valentine's Day surprise, which is why I thought that this took place in between the second and third movies. However, the penguins leave on the plane at the end of the movie, effectively making this short, unfortunately, not canon. There are a lot of plot holes between the Penguins movie and the show, but the main problem is the backstory and setup in the beginning of the film. In the show, there are many times where it's clear that the penguins had separate lives prior to working together as a team. Private is clearly a rookie, whereas the others have probably been there longer, which actually fits with parts of the plot later in the movie. But Skipper clearly has an entire history that the rest don't know about, especially with Hans and Dr. Blowhole, not to mention Manfredi or Johnson and at least one other penguin, possibly more. Rico is also mentioned as having once not been with the group. When Skipper talks about how their psych screening is so good he doesn't know how Rico managed to pass it, Kowalski has probably known Skipper the longest. As there is no mention of him having a history apart from the group, this creates many points of contention for the canonicity of the movie. First, the whole backstory part at the beginning and the scene where they show up to the Central Park Zoo as children is definitely not canon. And there are many other smaller moments throughout the movie that point to that backstory rather than the one that has been set up in the show since 2008. This movie may be partially canon, though it's hard to ignore the plot holes. I would say that perhaps this takes place in an alternate timeline or universe. However, strangely, the writers of the movie decided to tie the story back into the show in an after-credits scene. I guess they wanted to give a nod to the show they shamelessly ripped off, but that's a topic for another video. Thanks for watching this episode of Madagascar Monday. If you want to see more videos like this, check out the last one I made explaining the mind-bending time travel episode, or subscribe and stay tuned for the next Madagascar Monday.